You ever feel like your family doesn't see you until you become a problem? Like you're invisible right up until the moment you say no? That's been my life for as long as I can remember, and I used to just take it, go along to get along, keep my head down, and try not to cause a stir. But when my grandpa passed away and left me his cabin, something in me snapped. Because that was the moment I realized my family wasn't just inconsiderate or forgetful. No, they saw me as a placeholder. Someone they could step over, walk past, or hand off without asking. I'm 29 now. My name's Josh. And what started with my mom handing over a set of keys like she was passing out candy turned into a courtroom drama that flipped my entire world upside down. Let me back up a little. I grew up in Michigan, the youngest of three. I've got an older brother named Cole and a sister named Ashley. My parents split when I was in middle school, and we mostly lived with my mom after that. She was one of those women who seemed to thrive in chaos, always juggling bills, jobs, and obligations, always exhausted, always making sure everyone knew just how much she was sacrificing. Cole left for college and never looked back, and Ashley, well, Ashley stayed close. Close to mom, close to the drama, close to whatever benefits she could milk out of a situation. She was the golden child, always getting the extra slice of cake, the nicer room, the praise. I was the quiet one, the good kid, the one who didn't cause trouble, the one who got overlooked. But I had one person who saw me. My grandpa. He was my mom's dad, a retired electrician who had this quiet way about him, stoic, dry-humored, but deeply observant. The kind of man who didn't talk much, but when he did, you listened. He had this small cabin up north, near Crystal Lake, surrounded by woods and silence and peace. We used to spend whole weekends up there when I was a kid, just me and him, fishing off the dock, fixing up the shed, chopping wood, and sitting on the porch sipping cocoa in silence. It was the only place that ever felt still, like I could breathe. I didn't find out until after his funeral that he left the cabin to me. Not to the family, not to all three of us, just me. A handwritten letter was tucked into his will, addressed to me. It was short, just a few lines, but I read it 100 times. This place gave me peace. You always appreciated it the most. Take care of it. Make it yours. Grandpa. I didn't cry at the funeral, but I cried reading that. The cabin was old, but sturdy. I'd been up there recently helping him winterize it the past 2 years, so I knew it was in decent shape. My plan was to keep it simple, fix it up over time, use it as a weekend retreat, maybe even an Airbnb down the line. Something quiet and stable. Something mine. But that's not how my mom saw it. About a week after the will was read, I got a text from her. Just casual, like she was asking if I wanted Chinese for dinner. Gave Ash the keys to the cabin. Figured she can get started moving in. Hope that's okay. I read it 3 times before I even reacted. I wasn't sure if I was hallucinating or if it was a joke. Moving in? Keys. Hope that's okay. I hadn't given her the keys. I hadn't given anyone permission. I hadn't even gone up there yet. I was still trying to process the fact that it was mine. So I called her. And I swear, her tone was like I was being dramatic for asking. "Oh, Josh, don't be so sensitive," she said, brushing it off. "Ashley's going through a lot right now with the divorce, and she just needs a place to land. It's not like she's taking it from you. It's family. We share." No, that's not how this works. That cabin wasn't some random sofa bed in a spare room. It wasn't a gift bag to hand out at a pity party. It was part of my inheritance. My grandpa's legacy. Something he specifically left to me. Not to be loaned out like a library book because Ashley needed to land somewhere. I told Mom I didn't give permission and I wanted Ashley out. She paused for half a second and then said, "Josh, she's already there." Already there. That was the moment everything started to change in my head. That phrase rang in my ears for the rest of the night, like an alarm bell I couldn't turn off. Already there. I didn't even know how she got the keys. Turns out Grandpa had left an extra set in his kitchen drawer that my mom apparently felt entitled to rummage through after the funeral. And Ashley? She didn't text me, didn't ask, didn't check in, just packed her stuff, drove up, and let herself in like it was her birthright. At first, I tried to handle it calmly. I texted Ashley and said we needed to talk. She hit me back with a thumbs up and then nothing for 2 days. Finally, she called, sounding like she was calling to cancel a dentist appointment. "Yeah, I saw your text," she said. "Look, it's not a big deal. I'm only staying until I figure stuff out. You weren't using it." I hadn't even been up there yet, I said, trying to keep my voice level. "Exactly," she replied, like that proved her point. I started to get that tight feeling in my chest, the kind where you know if you speak again, you might say something you can't take back. So I said, I'm coming up this weekend. We'll talk then. She gave me a non-committal sure and hung up. I drove up that Saturday, still holding out hope that maybe it wasn't as bad as it sounded. Maybe she just brought a few things. Maybe it was temporary. Maybe she was sleeping on a couch and keeping the place tidy. Nope. I pulled up to the driveway and my stomach dropped. Ashley had moved in. Like, full on. Her SUV was in the driveway. There were potted plants on the porch. She'd painted the front door blue. There was a wind chime. A wind chime. There were kids' toys in the yard. Her sons. Her ex had taken off 6 months ago and left her with a 5-year-old and a pile of debt. That sucks. I sympathize. But that doesn't give her the right to steal my inheritance. When I knocked on the door, she answered in sweatpants and a hoodie, holding a coffee mug and looking like she'd just finished watching an episode of Fixer Upper. Hey, she said, like I was some buddy from college dropping by to hang out. Want to come in? I made cinnamon rolls. I didn't even move. You painted the door? I asked. She glanced behind her like she'd forgotten. Oh yeah? It was looking a little faded. I figured you wouldn't mind. I minded. I walked in, and the place looked like she'd been there for months. Rugs. Curtains. Her son's drawings on the fridge. Half the furniture had been replaced. My grandpa's old leather armchair, the one he used to nap in, was gone. I couldn't even see it anywhere. She'd replaced it with some IKEA beanbag chair monstrosity. I asked where it went. Oh, it was all scratched up, she said. Probably had mice. I donated it. That was the moment the final piece clicked into place. She didn't think she was borrowing the cabin. She thought it was hers. And that's when I knew this wasn't going to be a casual family disagreement. This was going to be war. I barely slept the night after I saw what Ashley had done to the cabin. I crashed in a cheap motel 5 miles away, pacing the floor while staring at the ceiling fan like it might offer some kind of answer. Part of me wanted to storm back over there and drag her out by the roots of her overgrown entitlement. But the other part, the one that still clung to the scraps of family loyalty, told me to think, to plan, to not burn the whole forest down just yet. I decided I'd try one more conversation. I drove back the next morning. Her SUV was still there, naturally. A new addition had joined the porch overnight, a little welcome mat that said home sweet home. I wanted to rip it in half with my teeth. Ashley opened the door, sipping the same coffee mug, like nothing about this situation was even remotely off. Josh, you're back, she said, sounding fake surprised. Didn't expect you this early. I stood on the threshold, not stepping in this time. I want my cabin back, I said flatly. Her smile tightened like she was bracing for an incoming tide. We talked about this. No, you talked. I didn't agree to anything. She leaned on the doorframe, her voice shifting into that syrupy condescension she always used when she wanted to act superior. Josh, you don't need it. You live in the city. You've got your apartment, your job, your whole quiet life thing going on. This place would have just sat empty. I'm using it. I'm giving it life. I felt my jaw tighten. That's not your decision. She raised her eyebrows like I was being unreasonable. Mom said you'd be like this. Oh, there it was. I should have seen it sooner. The whole thing stunk of Mom's fingerprints. Ashley didn't have the guts to pull this kind of power play on her own. She'd always needed an enabler. And my mother? She'd been an Olympic-level gaslighter for as long as I could remember. Did she now? I said, forcing my tone to stay even. Ashley folded her arms. She said you'd act like you're the only one who ever cared about Grandpa, but we all loved him. Just because he left your name on a piece of paper doesn't mean the rest of us don't matter. And there it was, the unspoken truth, finally spoken. That ugly, simmering resentment that had always lived beneath Ashley's surface. She'd always hated that Grandpa and I were close. He was the only adult in our family who never catered to her drama, and she never forgave him for it. I didn't respond. I just turned and walked away. Later that day, I called my mom. She answered on the third ring, and I could already hear the performative sigh in her voice. Josh, honey, I'm exhausted. Can we make this quick? I want to talk about the cabin. Silence. Then, oh, for heaven's sake. Are you still mad about that? She moved in. She threw out Grandpa's chair. She painted the door. She's talking like it's hers. Well, maybe if you'd made it clear what you were doing with it, we wouldn't have had to make a judgment call. Josh, she said, using that sharp tone she always used when she wanted to shut something down, You're not being fair. Ashley is going through a lot. You've always had it easier. No kids, no divorce, no financial stress. You live in your own little bubble, and it's time you started being a little more generous. I could feel something twist in my gut. You gave away something that wasn't yours, I said quietly. Grandpa left that cabin to me. In writing. He chose me. And he was old, Josh. His mind wasn't what it used to be. He probably thought you'd be the responsible one. That doesn't mean you should hoard it like some kind of dragon. Don't do that, I snapped. Don't twist this. I'm not twisting anything, she said, voice sharp now. I'm protecting my daughter. Your sister, who has a child, who needed a home. There it was. The hierarchy. The unspoken family rule. Ashley first. Josh last. I didn't even respond. I just hung up. That week, I called a lawyer. I needed to know exactly what my rights were and how fast I could get my sister out. The attorney, an older guy named Mr. Bearden, was calm and methodical. He reviewed the will, the title deed, and everything Grandpa had filed. It's crystal clear, he said. Your grandfather left the property to you exclusively. No trust, no joint ownership, no transfer on death clause. You own it outright. So if I wanted to have her evicted, she's a squatter, he said. Even if she's family, she has no legal right to be there. But I recommend a formal notice. We do this by the book. I felt like I could breathe again. I sent the notice via certified mail. Gave Ashley 30 days to vacate. Attached a copy of the will, the deed, everything. She didn't respond. Just posted a picture of her kid on the cabin porch on Instagram with the caption, "Fresh start." A week later, I went up to the cabin again. Her SUV was gone, and I hoped, maybe she'd taken the hint. But when I walked in, I realized the SUV wasn't gone. It had just been replaced by a moving truck. She was in the living room with a man I didn't recognize, assembling what looked like a massive entertainment center. Oh hey, she said, like I was just the pizza guy showing up uninvited. You're early. Thought you weren't coming till next weekend. What is this? I asked. She looked at the guy, then back at me, laughing lightly. Oh, this is Nate. He's helping me get set up. Set up for what exactly? She blinked. Living here. I gave you a formal notice. Yeah, and I ignored it, she said with a shrug, like I'd just handed her a party invite she couldn't be bothered to RSVP to. Nate looked confused. Wait, is this your? I own this place, I said to him, voice louder than I intended. Ashley frowned. Josh, don't make a scene. You are trespassing. She rolled her eyes. It's not that serious. I stood there, chest tight, staring at the walls that had once held my grandfather's tools, his photos, his memories, and now they were covered in Ashley's nonsense. Vision boards, dream catchers, LED lights, a big canvas painting of some dumb quote. Let it be. I walked out. 2 days later, she posted on Facebook a long, sobbing rant about how she'd been betrayed by her own brother, how she was just trying to give her son stability, and how some people care more about property than people. The comments flooded in. Her friends, distant cousins, even some of our relatives. How could he kick you out? What a selfish move. You deserve that cabin more than anyone. One even said, your brother sounds like a psychopath. I didn't respond. I wanted to. God, I wanted to. But I stayed quiet. For 2 weeks. Then I got a letter in the mail from her lawyer. Her lawyer. She was suing me for emotional damages and implied tenancy, claiming she had a verbal agreement with our mother and that she'd invested emotionally and financially in the property and therefore deserved occupational rights or a share of equity. I nearly blacked out from rage reading it. That was the breaking point. That was when I knew we weren't just having a family fight anymore. This wasn't about grief or miscommunication. This was about entitlement. About someone who thought they could rewrite reality and bully me into giving up what was mine. And Mom, she didn't just support Ashley. She wrote a statement for her case. Claimed in writing that Grandpa had always meant for the cabin to be shared, and that I was twisting his legacy for personal gain. That's when I felt the final string snap. I wasn't invisible anymore. Now I was the enemy, and I was done playing nice. The next step? Court. And what I discovered during that trial. Let's just say it changed everything. There's a strange sort of silence that follows betrayal, one that doesn't come with slammed doors or screaming matches. It's just this dead quiet in your chest. A cold stillness. Like everything inside you has frozen for a second because your brain can't keep up with what just happened. That's how I felt reading my own mother's statement against me. Her words were printed neatly in black ink on legal paper, filed in court, signed and sworn. There was no metaphor left. No gray area. She had picked a side, and it wasn't mine. That was the fall. I hit rock bottom in ways I didn't expect. Not just financially. I had savings, and the lawyer fees were manageable. But emotionally, I felt like a ghost in my own life. Like I'd become the villain in a story I didn't even write. Family members stopped returning my calls. A few unfollowed me on social media, which I wouldn't have cared about if they hadn't liked and commented on Ashley's pity parade the week before. I got texts from cousins I hadn't heard from in years, saying things like, "You should have just let her stay a while," and "It's not like you need the place." One even asked, "Why would you take a single mom to court?" I didn't respond to that one. I didn't respond to any of them. I stopped opening social media altogether. I deleted the apps from my phone. I stopped answering most calls. The only people I spoke to regularly were Mr. Bearden, my lawyer, and my coworker Sarah, who noticed something was off and kept gently checking in. I gave her the bare minimum of the situation, and she never pushed. She just invited me to lunch once a week and sent dumb memes to keep me grounded. Still, there were nights I'd sit alone in my apartment and question everything. Was I overreacting? Was I the bad guy? Was I really that cold? That selfish? But then I'd pull out Grandpa's letter. The real one. The one in his handwriting. This place gave me peace. You always appreciated it the most. Take care of it. Make it yours. And I'd remember, no, this wasn't about greed. It wasn't about denying my sister a home. It was about respect, boundaries, legacy. He trusted me with something, and they were treating it like a spare room in a hotel. So I kept going. Quietly. Slowly. Privately. The first real step in my climb back up came from something small. I found Grandpa's old toolbox in my closet. The one he gave me 2 years ago when he stopped driving up to the cabin himself. It was full of rusted sockets and a broken headlamp, but the sight of it, it grounded me. It reminded me that I had roots deeper than this mess. That I came from someone steady, someone honest. That weekend, I didn't drive to the courthouse. I didn't stew in my apartment. I drove up north to a different lake, nowhere near the cabin, and rented a cheap Airbnb for 2 nights. No Wi-Fi, no TV, just trees, a cold breeze, and a notebook. I started writing things down, not just the court stuff. Everything. How I felt, what I wanted, who I trusted, what kind of man I wanted to be when this ended, because it would end. Those 2 days were the first I'd felt like myself in months. I started doing it every few weeks, disconnecting completely, taking little trips. Nothing fancy. Just somewhere quiet. I started running again, too. Not for speed, but for rhythm, for breath. I'd wake up early, put on some worn-out sneakers, and run 3 miles around my neighborhood until the thoughts in my head stopped clashing long enough to let me breathe. Work helped, too. I'm a graphic designer, freelance mostly, and I'd let a few clients go during the worst of the chaos. But now, I picked up a new project. One that had nothing to do with cabins or courtrooms. It was a branding package for a small coffee shop opening upstate. The owner, a woman named Elena, was kind and easy to work with. She liked my first concept so much she asked me if I wanted to do the mural inside the shop, too. I almost said no, but something in me said, why not? So I drove up there, walked into the empty shop with paint cans and brushes, and spent 2 days painting a massive, colorful mural of wildflowers bursting out of a coffee cup. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine. And when I stepped back to look at it, I felt something strange. Pride. Not the angry kind. Not the ego kind. The quiet kind. The kind that says, I'm still here. Back in court, things were moving slowly, but they were moving. Mr. Bearden kept me updated. Ashley's lawyer was trying everything. Emotional arguments. Verbal contracts. Even a vague accusation that I'd intimidated her on the porch, which was laughable considering the only witnesses were her handyman and a raccoon. But none of it was sticking. Bearden was sharp, focused. He filed motions, gathered evidence, stayed calm while Ashley's side tried to drag us into emotional mud. We got access to some of Ashley's messages and photos through Discovery, and let me tell you, those told a different story. Screenshots of her texts to friends saying, he won't fight me. He's too soft. Pictures of her posing in the cabin with captions like, manifesting this place for me and Logan. One even said, it's basically mine. Mom says he won't do anything. That one stung, but it also helped. Meanwhile, my mom stayed quiet. At least publicly. She didn't call, didn't message, didn't check in once. And that silence, somehow, hurt worse than the letter. I remembered birthdays she'd forgotten, school recitals she skipped, times I got sick and she sent Ashley to check on me instead of coming herself. I remembered her calling me overdramatic at 13 when I cried after my pet dog died, telling me, boys don't act like that. I remembered her giving Ashley the last slice of cake at Grandpa's 80th, even though he'd told me to save it. These memories didn't flood in all at once. They came like waves, small, then bigger, then crashing. And one night, sitting alone in my apartment with a bowl of cold rice, it hit me. She'd always chosen Ashley. Not just in this. Not just with the cabin. Always. And that realization? It didn't destroy me. It freed me. Because for the first time in my life, I stopped hoping for her approval. I stopped waiting for her to apologize. I stopped needing her to change. Instead, I changed me. I moved to a new apartment. Smaller, quieter, cheaper. One with better light, and a little nook where I set up a reading chair. I started journaling regularly. I finally booked that therapy session Sarah had nudged me toward. I didn't unload everything in the first session, but I talked about Grandpa, about the cabin, about feeling unseen. The therapist, Marcus, just listened, asked simple questions, let the silences hang without rushing to fill them. At one point, I told him, I think I used to believe if I was just good enough, they'd treat me better. And he said, what if you were already good enough, and they just weren't capable of seeing it? That one stuck with me for weeks. By the time the trial date was officially scheduled, I was ready. Not just legally, but emotionally. Ashley didn't scare me anymore. Neither did my mom. They weren't some towering force I had to dodge or please. They were just people. People who made choices. And I had the right to make mine. Still, I won't pretend I wasn't nervous. The night before the trial, I barely slept. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, picturing the courtroom, the judge, Ashley's smug expression. I imagined my mom walking in and sitting behind her. I imagined myself stuttering, fumbling, looking small. But I also imagined Grandpa, sitting in that old leather chair, watching, and I knew what I had to do. The next morning, I put on a navy suit. Nothing flashy, just clean, professional. I packed the original copy of Grandpa's letter in a folder, just in case. I ate a real breakfast, drove to the courthouse early, sat in the parking lot for 10 minutes, gripping the steering wheel like it was the only thing keeping me from floating away. Then I walked inside. Ashley was already there. She looked different, maybe more tired, maybe more polished. I couldn't tell. She didn't look at me. Her lawyer, some slick guy in his 40s with too much hair gel, kept glancing over like he was sizing me up. My mom wasn't in the room. Not yet. Then, just before the judge walked in, the door opened, and my stomach dropped. Because she did show up. And not alone. She was holding something. And when I realized what it was, my skin went cold. She was carrying a box. A box labeled Grandpa's personal files. She carried it like it was nothing. A cardboard file box with duct tape along the sides and Grandpa's name scrawled in fading black marker. J.R. Thomas, personal. I hadn't seen that handwriting in over a year, but the sight of it made my heart stop mid-beat. My mom didn't look at me as she walked in. Just beeline for Ashley and her lawyer, set the box beside them, and sat down behind their table like she was exactly where she belonged. Part of their team. No hesitation. No shame. Mr. Bearden, seated next to me, leaned over and muttered, that box wasn't in discovery. I nodded stiffly. My stomach had turned to ice. They were playing something. I didn't know what yet, but I knew this wasn't a spontaneous act of conscience. My mother didn't do spontaneous, and she definitely didn't do helpful. The judge entered moments later, and the trial began. Nothing dramatic at first. The opening arguments were short. Bearden's was steady and logical. My grandfather left the cabin to me. Ashley had no legal right to move in. She'd refused a formal notice to vacate. We weren't arguing emotions. We were arguing property law, and the law was clear. Ashley's lawyer tried to paint a different picture. Hardship, family misunderstanding, an informal verbal agreement based on years of trust. He even used the phrase moral ownership, which almost made me laugh out loud. He spoke like we were in a therapy session, not a courtroom. And when he motioned toward the box and said, we have further documentation of the family's understanding of Mr. Thomas's intentions, I felt Bearden's shoulder tense next to me. The judge glanced at the box, but didn't touch it yet. Instead, He nodded and said, "We'll review exhibits after the initial testimonies." So, that's how we started. They called Ashley first. She took the stand in a beige sweater, minimal makeup, and her hair in a loose braid. She looked soft, vulnerable. I knew it was intentional. She gave her answers in a calm, slightly breathy voice, pausing often as if reliving trauma. Her lawyer walked her through the expected narrative. How her divorce had left her and her son with nowhere to go. How our mother had assured her it was fine to stay at the cabin. How she'd invested time and money into improving the place. How I hadn't expressed any desire to use it. And how she believed, genuinely, that it was a shared family property. Bearden didn't interrupt much, just took notes. He only asked 2 questions during cross: whether she ever paid property taxes on the cabin, she hadn't, and whether she had ever communicated with me about the arrangement in writing before she moved in, she hadn't. Her answers were quiet, but the damage was done. The courtroom was not swayed by tears or assumptions. It wanted receipts. Next came my turn. I won't pretend I wasn't nervous, but something had shifted in me. The more I spoke, the steadier I felt. I explained everything from the beginning. The relationship I had with my grandfather, the letter he left me, the will, the shock of finding Ashley already moved in. I didn't embellish or lash out. I let the facts speak. When I mentioned the chair she'd thrown out, the one Grandpa always sat in, my voice caught for a second, and I saw the judge glance up. I don't know what he was thinking, but I knew he heard it. The weight of it. The loss beneath the conflict. Bearden's final question to me was simple. "Josh, what does the cabin represent to you?" I paused, not for effect, but because the answer came from somewhere deep. "It's peace," I said. "It's the one place I ever felt like I mattered. My grandfather gave it to me because he knew I needed it, and because I respected it. I never saw it as a trophy or a handout. I saw it as a responsibility." The room went still. Then it was Mom's turn. She wasn't called to the stand immediately. First, Ashley's lawyer introduced the contents of the box. They claimed it contained informal correspondences, personal notes, and property-related documents that support Ms. Thomas's belief that the cabin was intended as shared. The judge allowed the submission, and the bailiff carried the box over. I watched with clenched teeth as papers were sorted and a few selected items handed to the court clerk. Ashley's lawyer then motioned to call their final witness, my mother. She walked up slowly, every movement calculated. I couldn't tell if she was nervous or simply playing the role of the neutral matriarch. Her expression was mild. Her eyes didn't once meet mine. She swore her oath, took the seat, and folded her hands neatly in her lap. Her lawyer began. "Ma'am, can you describe your understanding of your father's wishes regarding the Crystal Lake cabin?" She gave a soft sigh, like she'd been holding this in for years. "My father was a very private man. He didn't always explain things clearly, especially when it came to paperwork. But he often spoke to me, as his daughter, about wanting the cabin to stay in the family. He didn't believe in favoritism. He just wanted it cared for. And did he ever suggest that Josh should be the sole owner?" She tilted her head slightly. "Not to me. In fact, he expressed concern about isolating one child over the others. He told me multiple times he hoped the cabin would be a shared refuge for all the grandchildren." Her voice was syrupy smooth. "Practiced." Ashley's lawyer then produced a handwritten note from the box. "Is this your father's handwriting?" She glanced at it and nodded. "Yes." "And what does it say?" She read aloud. "Whoever has the cabin must remember it's not just a house. It's a legacy. It's for everyone who finds peace there." Ashley's lawyer beamed. No further questions. Bearden stood slowly. "Ms. Thomas," he began, "did you have access to your father's files before or after his death?" "I helped organize them after the funeral." "Were you the executor of his will?" "No." "So you weren't authorized to handle or distribute property documents?" "I was simply trying to help." "And yet you provided your daughter with keys to the cabin?" "I believe she had every right to be there." He nodded. "Was that belief based on legal advice or emotional preference?" She stiffened. "It was based on what I knew of my father's wishes. Even though those wishes were clearly documented in a legal will naming only Josh as the beneficiary." Silence. He leaned forward, voice calm. "Miss Thomas, did you ever tell Josh you were giving Ashley the keys?" "I texted him after." "After? So not before? Not with his consent?" She hesitated. "It was an emergency. Ashley had nowhere else to go." "So you made an executive decision regarding property that wasn't yours." And now you're attempting to validate that decision retroactively. Is that correct? I was trying to keep the family together. Bearden nodded, then pulled something from his folder. A copy of Grandpa's letter. One last question. This letter, in your father's handwriting, left with the will, does it contradict anything you've said today? She blinked, reading it. No, but... Thank you. No further questions. She was dismissed. And that was when everything changed. After the judge called for a short recess, Bearden pulled me aside. She slipped, he said. What do you mean? She admitted she was an executor. That she handled private documents after death without permission. That's a problem for their side. More than they realize. But she didn't lie about the note. She didn't have to, he said. Because that note? We're going to use it. Not the way they think. Back in the courtroom, Bearden submitted a motion to cross-examine the full contents of the file box. Since it had been entered as an exhibit, the judge approved it. And here's where the setup truly began. Bearden went through each document with a fine-tooth comb. Most were inconsequential, old water bills, property maps, repair estimates. But then he found something they must not have noticed or thought irrelevant. An insurance policy update from 3 years ago. One that named me, and only me, as the cabin's sole listed resident in the event of structural damage. Bearden smiled. Why would your grandfather list you as the sole policyholder 3 years before his death if he intended the cabin to be shared? He asked aloud. Ashley's lawyer fumbled for a response, but the judge held up a hand. Let's proceed, he said, and I'd like to hear more about this document. Bearden whispered to me later. That alone could destroy their emotional argument. But we're not done. Over the next 2 days, Bearden quietly laid the groundwork. He called the notary who witnessed Grandpa's will. He brought in the cabin's former property manager, who testified that I was the only one who ever visited or maintained it. He even pulled banking records that showed Ashley hadn't spent a dime on repairs, contrary to her testimony. Piece by piece, the house of cards came down. And then, Bearden made one final, subtle move. He hinted to the court that a countersuit could be filed for trespassing, damage to private property, and fraudulent misrepresentation, all stemming from the unauthorized occupation of the cabin. Ashley's face paled. Even her lawyer looked uneasy. But Bearden didn't file it. Not yet. He was waiting, watching, setting the trap. Because now we had leverage. And leverage meant power. The courtroom smelled like dry paper and weak coffee. The kind of place where stories go to die unless someone fights to keep them alive. I'd sat through 3 full days of testimony, slow building tension, and smug side glances from Ashley and my mother. But today, day 4, was different. Today, the trap would snap shut. It started quietly. Bearden requested permission to introduce one final exhibit, an affidavit signed by the notary who witnessed Grandpa's will. The judge nodded, and Bearden handed over the document like it was nothing special. But it was. Because in that affidavit, the notary stated under oath that not only had Grandpa clearly indicated that the cabin was to go solely to me, but that he specifically mentioned not wanting Ashley or my mother to meddle with it. The exact quote. My grandson Josh is the only one who never took from me. The cabin is his. Tell the others not to touch it. They'll twist it into something it's not. When the judge read that line aloud, the silence in the courtroom shifted. He didn't say anything for a long moment. Just stared at the page. Ashley's lawyer leaned over and whispered something frantically into her ear. She blinked, looked toward our mother. Mom's lips were pressed so tight they were almost white. Then Bearden stood up slowly and asked to proceed with our final motion. This was the part they never saw coming. Because while they had been so busy trying to take the cabin, we'd quietly been documenting the damage they'd caused. Bearden laid it all out. Ashley had replaced structural elements of the cabin without a permit or licensed contractor. She'd sold or thrown away multiple heirlooms, including Grandpa's chair and an antique fishing rod set, valued at $2,000 in the estate inventory. Her son had left permanent marker drawings on the pinewood wall in the guest room. She posted about it on Instagram, captioned, "Oops. Too cute to be mad, grinning face with sweat." She had painted, drilled, mounted, and disposed of property, all without my consent. We had the receipts, the photos, the appraisals, the social media posts, all collected, time-stamped, and packaged neatly in a folder labeled Unauthorized Alterations. Bearden took his time, laying it out piece by piece while Ashley's lawyer turned a deep shade of red. And then, the final blow. We are requesting full reimbursement of repair and restoration costs totaling $18,450.72, along with punitive damages for unlawful occupation and emotional distress. The emotional distress was modest. We weren't aiming high. But the symbolism? Devastating. Ashley's lawyer tried to object. He claimed the figure was exaggerated, that her son's drawings were easily painted over, that she didn't understand the rules. But Bearden remained calm. She chose to move in without consent, he said. She chose to alter the property. She chose to ignore a formal eviction notice. These were not accidents. They were decisions. Then he turned to the judge. And as for Ms. Thomas, the defendant's mother, she accessed confidential property records without authorization and handed over property keys. While we are not pursuing damages from her directly, we asked that her actions be noted for the record. My mom flinched. That was the first time she looked at me in days. I didn't look back. The judge called a brief recess to review the documents. When he returned, his face was unreadable. He spoke slowly, deliberately. It is clear from the evidence presented that the Crystal Lake cabin was bequeathed solely to the plaintiff, Josh Thomas. The will is unambiguous. Furthermore, the letter of intent, notary affidavit, and insurance documentation confirm that the deceased intended this property to be kept under exclusive ownership. Ashley sank deeper in her chair. The judge continued. Ms. Ashley Thomas unlawfully occupied this property, refused to vacate after being notified, and performed unauthorized modifications that resulted in measurable damages. He adjusted his glasses and paused for effect. I hereby rule in favor of the plaintiff. Ms. Thomas is ordered to vacate the property immediately, pay $18,450.72 in damages, and submit a formal apology to be filed with the court for unauthorized occupation. Ashley's mouth fell open. An apology? The judge looked at her flatly. Yes, Ms. Thomas. A written acknowledgement of your unlawful conduct is the least you can offer. Then he turned to my mother. And while Ms. Joanne Thomas is not the legal party in this case, I am entering into the record a formal rebuke of her involvement. Accessing estate records and distributing property access without legal authority is not just inappropriate, it is unethical. My mother's face was stone, but her hands gripped the edge of the bench like she needed it to stay upright. Court adjourned. I stood up slowly as Bearden packed up his papers. Ashley didn't say a word. She grabbed her purse, ignored the apology order like it was a joke, and stormed out. My mom followed her, fast and stiff, not once looking back at me. I didn't follow. I didn't chase. Bearden looked at me and smiled slightly. You did good, Josh. I didn't win $1 million, I said. No, he said, but you defended yourself. You honored the man who trusted you. And that's worth more. I gave Ashley 2 weeks to move out. She tried to drag it to the deadline, but I had someone on site to supervise. She wasn't allowed to remove anything that wasn't hers. She tried to claim the new couch and coffee table until we showed her the receipts were under her name. They stayed. I had them donated the next day. The potted plants? Gone. The blue paint on the door? Repainted the original shade of pine green. The wind chime? I smashed it myself. 1 week later, I went back to the cabin. Alone, just like I had when I was a kid. I brought a cooler, a folding chair, and Grandpa's toolbox. I sat on the porch for a long time, listening to the wind rustling through the trees. There was no drama, no yelling, no tension, just silence, just peace. I did eventually get the apology, months later, in a short, typed letter full of legal jargon and zero remorse. But I didn't need it, because the real apology wasn't words. It was the empty porch, the returned keys, the locked door. My mother never reached out, not even a passive-aggressive text. I think, in some twisted way, she still believes she was doing the right thing, that she was keeping the family together. But the truth is, you can't protect family by destroying someone else's sense of self. You either see the people in front of you, or you don't. And she never saw me. But Grandpa did. And that's why this cabin is mine. That's why I painted his name above the fireplace in small, hand-carved letters. J.R. Thomas, Peacekeeper. It's not for Airbnb anymore. It's not for the family. It's not for Ashley. It's for me. Because sometimes, revenge isn't about fireworks or screaming matches. Sometimes, it's just about sitting on a porch you earned, sipping coffee from your own mug, and listening to the wind that no one else can take away from you. And that's exactly what I did.